Good morning and welcome to Pancakes and Politics, another virtual version here almost to the month of June, towards the end of May. We've got an exciting panel this morning. We're going to touch on a number of subjects. We've got panelists from some born and raised here, some from out of town here, and we're going to talk about a number of different subjects pertinent to the city of Detroit and actually the United States. But first, my dear friend, a word from CEO of Real Times Media, Hiram Jackson.
And welcome to the third installment of the Michigan Chronicle, Pancakes and Politics. My name is Hiram Jackson, and I'm the CEO of Real Times Media and the publisher of the Michigan Chronicle. And we have a very special program here for you this morning. How would you reimagine the great city of Detroit? If you had a magic wand, or if you had the power to do so, how would you recreate Detroit? Well, we have a panel here today that's going to share with us some innovative things that they're currently doing in their organizations and some things that they want us to consider as we reimagine our great city. But before we get to the panel, I always want to thank the sponsors. These are our partners. These are companies that believe in the work that we do. So let me thank them. PNC Bank, our top sponsor, our presenting sponsor for the last 7 years. Thank you, PNC Bank. The folks at PNC Bank and Rick DeVore have been very supportive for so many years. Thank you. Walker Miller Energy Services, DTE Foundation, Rocket Mortgage, Signal Restoration Services, and our pioneer partner, Henry Ford Health System and HAP. You know, over the last 13 months, it's been tough. It's been challenging. But these companies have been ride or die with the Michigan Chronicle and Real Times Media, and we appreciate their support. We have some very special guests that are going to be joining us in the future. Hopefully we can find a way to be back in person very soon. But until then, let me share with you who's going to be joining us. Miss Mary Barra, Chairman and CEO of General Motors Corporation, will be joining us. Mr. Jerry Norcia, DTE Energy Chairman, CEO. And guess what? Both U.S. Senators, Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow, will make a joint appearance at Pancakes and Politics. Details will be released very shortly, but I tell you, we are super excited about bringing these programs directly to you. Now, let me say this. Last month, I forgot to mention something to you. Our good friend, Vicki Thomas, you noticed that she wasn't a part of the program last month. Vicki was promoted to a new job at the city of Detroit and had been with WWJ, of course, for 30 years. And I forgot to thank her. So, Vicki, thank you. You have been ride or die for 16 years. You have supported us. You believed in us before others did. Thank you, Vicki Thomas, and I wish you well in your new job at the city of Detroit. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our good friends at PNC Bank. They have a greeting message for you this morning, and enjoy the program.
Good morning, and welcome to Pancakes and Politics. My name is Amy McLean. I'm the Vice President of Client and Community Relations Director for PNC Bank. It's truly my pleasure to welcome you this morning on behalf of Rick DeVore, our Regional President, and all of PNC. Today's topic, Reimagining Detroit, feels particularly timely. It wasn't that long ago that the city went through the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. Fast forward to today, Detroit is experiencing a true renaissance. I'm proud to say that PNC is playing a significant role in the city's resurgence. For example, Just last week, Rick joined Mayor Duggan to announce a $7.5 million investment from PNC to help create and preserve affordable housing through the Detroit Housing for Future Fund. Other recent commitments by PNC include a $10 million New Markets tax credit investment in the Sugar Hill development in Midtown, $6.2 million in equity, and $4.7 million in debt financing for the Chroma building redevelopment in Milwaukee Junction neighborhood, and more than $4 million from the PNC Foundation to benefit Detroit preschoolers through PNC Grow Up Great. Thanks to all of you for attending today's important conversation on Reimaging Detroit. It was truly my pleasure to welcome you this morning. I look forward to hearing from our panel.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Hiram. And we would be remiss as a production team and myself as a host to not also, if I didn't echo our thanks, appreciation, and support for Vicki and the work that she did with us at Pancakes and Politics. Vicki preceded me, and so she set a high standard, and she's going to excel in her new job working for Mayor Duggan. So we wish you, Vicki, the best of luck. Let me introduce our panel. We'll go ladies first. My mother taught me to do that, Darian. But Dr. Darian Hudson is President and CEO of United Way for Southeastern Michigan, doing phenomenal work. We're going to get into the detail of the work. But it's funny. It's kind of like when I meet somebody and they're like, "Oh, is your dad Dennis Archer, the mayor?" I'm like, "Yeah." And so people meet you and they're like, "You're Tiffany Jackson's girl." Darian and Tiffany Jackson, who works with me, are good friends. To my left is Jacob Cohen, but we're going to go with Jake while we're here today. So Jake is one of the founding members of Detroit Venture Partners. When we talk about reimagining Detroit, probably 50 or 60 years ago, we would not have thought of Detroit as a hub for tech. And so, Jake, we're going to get into that a little bit later. And our social entrepreneur, Mr. Sean Wilson, is a professed social entrepreneur, but he has lived that his life. We've known him, a lot of us, for his work, most recently at the Ford Foundation, very supportive of the city of Detroit, very instrumental, Sean, as it relates to the train station and that investment and the way that it was executed as it relates to including that community and taking input from that community really is a new blueprint for large-scale community investment. So we thank you for that. And welcome to town, Kofi.
Hey, thank you.
Kofi is president and CEO of Bedrock. Could have retired now. And we're going to get to the story of how you got here. But Kofi's had an esteemed career helming publicly traded companies on the West Coast, being in the front office of professional sports, having an investment and real estate development company yourself with your wife. And now you are here putting roller skating rinks in downtown Detroit. So we're gonna get to all that shortly. And actually, let me start with that since we're with you, Kofi. We've had a pleasure of spending some time together, and it's very interesting for the rest of the panel. People kept saying you should meet Kofi when he got to town, and it had been months. So finally, I just said, I need to see if I can get him to come over to my house for dinner. And I can't remember a time where I've had a stranger that I've never met before come to my house. We had a lovely evening, and some of your colleagues came, and your lovely wife came, and it was fantastic. But you've worked significantly as an entrepreneur yourself for large publicly traded entities, for sports teams, but really all around investment in the community. And I know just from talking to you the importance of placemaking. You would say probably is just as important as the buildings or developments, the brick and mortar that's happening. And so now we see on the Monroe block, coming off of a phenomenal drive-in movie theater in the middle of downtown Detroit. No one would have thought that would have happened. And you're following that up with a very colorful, interactive play space on that Monroe block to include a roller skating rink. And for those of you who are watching, if y'all can remember Northland roller skating, with the 9 o'clock, 7 to 9 on Friday, was the place to be. So there's a lot of passion around skating in Detroit. How did that evolve? That specific project, but then in a broader scale, talk about the importance of placemaking as it intertwines with development.
Sure. Well, thank you. Well, happy to be here, and it was a lovely dinner. It was great to finally meet you. So, it's an interesting story. We had a little conversation before we sort of sat down, and we were talking about Atlanta. And I mentioned that my son was in Atlanta. He went to Morehouse. And I was talking to my son about 6 months ago about what people do, and so what young African American kids, what do they want to do? He said, Atlanta Friday nights roller skating. And I said, roller skating? He said, yeah. Then it reminded me that in San Francisco, in the Bayview Hunters Point district, they kept asking me to bring a roller rink there. And then I talked to some of the folks here in this city, and they also talked about roller skating. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but that's the idea, right? Roller skating. But then there are some really talented people within Bedrock that actually came up with this notion. Let's just take roller skating to another level. Let's get some really great local Detroit artists to really put something on the ground so people are really skating on art, and music and all that. So I say it's uniquely Detroit and authentically Detroit. Mm-hmm. So that's how it came about. And look, I take some credit for some of the idea, but it really belongs to my son. But the execution is all the team in Bedrock. All the team in Bedrock. They did a fantastic job. And I keep saying to myself, dare I tape my ankles and get out there and try it for a minute or two? I don't know, but maybe, just maybe, we'll see.
I'd probably leave that one alone.
You might be right there. But to the broader point, though, look, you've seen Detroit on its upswing, and certainly there was a dark time when much of Detroit, as I understand it, was frankly vacant. So clearly cities have much more than the bricks and glass and mortar and cement. Clearly. You have to infuse it with people, you have to infuse it with energy, you have to infuse it with excitement. People must want to be in those places because people generally want to be around other people, generally. The last year has been horrendous for us all. Everybody's played a little skit in the Brady Bunch every day with a Zoom or a go-to meetings, looking at each other in squares. And I sense this intensity and urgency for people to get back out. And it just so happened, we got a little lucky. We started planning this a long time ago, but it just looks like things are beginning to relax. So I just think that people need to be where they can meet other people, and they want to meet them in places and spaces that are memorable. So part of our job in building cities and building places is to create those places that create real memories for families. How many times have we talked to our parents and grandparents and they talk about, remember the day? Almost everybody I talk to in Detroit remembers some great times in Detroit, in the good old days. I would love to be able to be a part of creating some new memories for this next generation. And this is part of it. This is part of it, and we have a lot more coming.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Sean, just to piggyback on that, let's go back to Ford Foundation for a second. Follow that up in terms of your efforts in Corktown. Like what were those conversations prior to them being public with community leaders, with the mayor's office? It's a massive project. In large part, there were some murmurs around town, but in large part, you were able to keep it quiet. But talk about the importance of working with the community, delivering against the community's expectations, but while doing something that achieves your business objectives.
Yeah, I was blessed to spend, nearly 5 years, with Ford Motor Company Fund, and that project was really one of the most impactful projects that I had a chance to work on. And so, as I was pulled onto the lead team that was helping to kind of roll out the purchase of the train station and really focusing on the community engagement angle, we knew we had to really engage the community and gather community voice authentically. And luckily, part of my responsibilities at Ford Fund was to run the Ford Resource and Engagement Centers, and one of which is located in Corktown. So I already had a relationship with the community. We were already investing $5 million a year or whatever it was in that community. So I felt like we had some good credibility. It wasn't that we were coming in now because of the train station looking to invest. We had been investing in the community. So I would say, the foundation of that was Ford was a good corporate citizen for many, many years in that community, which then built the credibility as you look to do something as historic as the train station project. But we started with a series of visioning sessions, and really taking a humble approach to say, you know what you need in your community. We're really here to listen and to learn first and foremost, and then put the resources behind, your feedback. Now that's a scary thing. I've been doing those type of visioning sessions for 20 years, whether it was with Youth Voice during my days with Usher's New Look in Atlanta, or the Ford Resource and Engagement Centers. And so it's a lived practice, right, for a couple decades. And it's a scary thing because a lot of times people say, well, what happens if the community asks for something that we can't deliver? And that's a real fear. And so what I always share is that, but you have to understand the root of what they're requesting. So for instance, if they ask for something that's not doable, what are they really asking for? As an example, we just led some visioning sessions in Mount Clemens in Macomb County because Boys and Girls Club is looking to expand into that area. And very similar, there was the feedback. Well, what happens if they ask for too much? And look what they're asking for. They're asking for a pool, and they're asking for a sports dome, and they're asking for, and I said, yeah, but the root of what they're asking for is a robust network of opportunities for their youth to engage in out of school time programming. So we don't necessarily have to deliver a sports dome. We don't necessarily have to deliver a pool. We can deliver a robust network of programming, out of school time programming that the youth can really lean into. And so long story short, I think that taking that approach was really beneficial. To your point, I think it was now the benchmark. I've heard that from the community direct, that they really felt like Ford authentically sought to understand what they're looking for and delivered on what they could, with it. And I'm proud that even after I left, Ford is continuing that work, which is really powerful. But the last thing I'll say is working on the train station is what actually inspired me to take the position as CEO with Boys and Girls Club. From having the conversations with Hiram, at first I was like, ooh, Boys and Girls Club, that's kind of a dated brand. I think gym swim, I'm a social entrepreneur, I'm a disruptor. I don't think that's a good fit. But then after working on the train station project, I said, but could you reimagine Boys and Girls Club for greater community impact? Could you reimagine it as super relevant for today? And quite honestly, I did the exact same process. In my first 100 days, I met with over 300 community stakeholders, did a dozen visioning sessions and benchmarking tours to set the vision, which is now focused on economic mobility.
Interesting, and talking about social impact, I want to come to you, Darian, in a second, but since I'm with you now, Sean, talk about those conversations, because for any of you that know Hiram well, Hiram is very convincing. Hiram tries to convince everyone he knows that works for a corporation to quit and be an entrepreneur. He convinced me to, get up bright and early and sit here in front of these cameras a few times a year. So I'm well aware of his skill set. But talk about that conversation and what was it that made you could have gone to do anything. You could have gone anywhere in the country. You probably could have gone to make some more bread. But you decided to work for this organization. To your point, that's brand probably needs a little bit of a refresh. So what made you decide to take on this challenge?
It's a great question. It was interesting because, just real talk, the organization was, getting ready to go out of business. It was in the process. It had shut down multiple clubs. It had to sell a club. The culture, the environment with the staff was super negative. It was, the programming was stale. There wasn't one part of the business that we didn't have to address, right? But even with all that, sitting with Hiram, I knew a couple things. One, Hiram was a board chair. And so, we talked about, hey, Hiram, if I come in, I'm going to be disruptive. That's who I am. And Hiram loved that. He's like, that's exactly what I want you to do, right? And I knew I would have the support of the board chair, because if you don't have support of your board, it doesn't matter how disruptive you are, you're not going to be able to progress. And then obviously Hiram, being an entrepreneur himself, I knew he would get what we were trying to do, right? And support it and throw his connections and all the resources that he has at his fingertips behind it. So it didn't really feel like a big risk. Obviously when the announcement came out, people were like, what the hell is Sean doing going to Boys and Girls Club? Because it felt off brand. But I knew I had a great champion in Hiram who is a former club kid himself. And so he cares about the brand. And that's huge because, he's going to support you and do whatever it takes to be successful. So as we went into the visioning sessions, having him at the tables with the youth members, the parents, other funders, it really allowed everybody to hear what the community was asking for. And what they're asking for was for us to treat the root cause of the problem. I spent 25 years trying to get kids to graduate on time, stopping teen pregnancy, gun violence, incarcerations. Those are all symptoms. The root cause of the issue is poverty. And so Boys and Girls Club now is all about economic mobility. Our goal is to make sure that our youth are career, startup, and homeowner ready. We want them earning a livable wage, understanding how to start a business, and owning their own home. And that's true economic mobility. So without the support of Hiram as board chair and the rest of the board, which was amazing, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And then finally, I'll say, we took some bold, drastic steps in a short period of time. We diversified our staff. Only about 20% of our leadership team was African American or color, yet we serve 85% African Americans. So we switched that. 100% of our leadership team is minority, women, and people of color. Our board, there's only about 15-20% of our board. We switched that. We have a 50-50 board now. So once again, you can't do any of that without the support of your board and a powerful board chair. So I'll send Hiram my invoice.
Right, exactly. So as you talk about kind of the new path and direction, getting to the root cause, and you talk about, obviously educating kids, having them be career ready, a lot of those careers are in the tech space. So first of all, let me say that I predict that by the end of this, that Detroit Venture Partners and perhaps StockX is going to have a partnership with you guys at the Boys and Girls Club, which I'm going to take credit for.
I like that.
But Jake, when you talk about reimagining Detroit, again, as I said in the introduction, people would not have thought that Detroit could be a center of tech innovation, that we would have a significant startup culture, that we would have a unicorn, and I'll let you describe what that is and which business that is, born and raised out of Detroit. Talk about what that means for you, because when you started the business several years ago, I'm not sure that you thought you'd have the success that you've had. And I don't think that you thought that what you all were doing was really going to significantly and almost at the outset single-handedly change the view of Detroit. As you look from Silicon Valley here, or from New York here, or from Austin here, all of a sudden we're at par with a lot of these communities. So talk about, first of all, what does DVP do for the broader audience, and then talk about the significance of what you do.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll say Detroit Venture Partners is a venture capital investor. We're part of this family of companies, which includes Bedrock and Rocket Mortgage, and Dan Gilbert being co-founder of Detroit Venture Partners, and his vision and he's a startup guy. He loves building companies. I think that's the one thing we all have in common at Detroit Venture Partners, is we just get excited about the possibility of a startup. And to be in a city that is reinventing itself or reimagining itself, has that same, vibe and excitement, and attracts entrepreneurs. I'll say, before I even get into, what we've accomplished or what we hope to accomplish, the thing you learn about startups and in building a startup ecosystem, and even in helping to reimagine a city overall, it's a long game. Mm-hmm. It's a long game. There's never one silver bullet. It takes everybody on this panel is doing as much for the startup community in a lot of ways as we are investing in startups. People build companies in cities where they want to live and work, and people found companies because they have an education that is, that fits, the time, and fits, what companies need and want at that time. And so you can't, there's no silver bullet and there's no one solution to building a vibrant ecosystem. And my favorite quote, and probably the most humbling thing that I learned over the last 10 years now, it's been 10 years since we've been investing in startups in Detroit. I think it's a Bill Gates quote, and I might get it a little wrong, but it's something like, we all overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And that's like, it's one thing to say it, but then to live it and feel it now, looking back. I mean, 5 years in, we had invested in a lot of companies. We were really trying to get the ball rolling to create an environment where people felt that they could build great tech companies in the city of Detroit. And we'd made a lot of investments, and we hadn't seen that unicorn, success story. And then in the last 5 years, you mentioned StockX, and whenever I'm in front of an audience. That's shameless
branding, by the way. I mean, it's perfectly facing the camera. Your sneaks are
I had
crispy.
to do this.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So whenever I'm in front of a camera as an investor in companies, I feel an obligation to help them grow their audience. So here we are. But also, it's a great story for Detroit and what's possible here. And we love to be able to point to an example, not just say, oh, we believe you can build a big company in this city like you can do it in any other city. Here's a company that started 6 years ago. And now, we have over 1,000 team members. They'll sell, over a couple $2 billion worth of sneakers and streetwear and collectibles on this platform, which is a global marketplace now, headquartered out of Detroit. And it shows that it's a tech company. It shows what's possible, what's possible here in the city. And it's great to have that example. We've had that example in some ways with Rocket Mortgage and Quicken Loans. Look at this great big company that we have in our family here. But to show how quickly something like this can develop. So the underestimate what you can do in 10 years, certainly I'd say we overestimate maybe what we can do in a year, but looking back on 10 years, this past year, we had 6 startups in the city of Detroit that raised over $10 million each in venture capital financing, not from us. The best part about that is it's not, we were a participant in those financings, but this is outside capital coming from all over the country, seeing the opportunity to invest in companies in Detroit. I think in the first 6 years we did this, I'm not sure we had one $10 million financing in the city of Detroit. And so just in the last year, we're seeing this kind of momentum having built up over the investments we've been making over a long period of time, and not just us investing in companies, but Bedrock investing in buildings and us investing in education and University of Michigan, Michigan State, engaging in the city of Detroit, and more talent kind of coming and staying in the city and in the metro area. And so, try to stop the brain drain. All these things, are so important to building a startup ecosystem. So, I'm not sure, really I would say the next 10 years, what gets me really excited about looking back at the last 10 years is, we underestimated in some ways what we could do in 10 years. The next 10 years, it's so much more clear to me how much opportunity there is to build off this foundation. Certainly we're still in the first inning of it. We're not, Silicon Valley yet. And building that ecosystem and making it an inclusive ecosystem and being an example for other cities about what's possible, that's kind of our challenge for the next 10 years. So
you mentioned, you obviously work with our youth. You mentioned education, and we're going to come back to inclusivity in venture capital and private equity spaces in a bit. But you need talent, Darren, for all of that. You need a pipeline of students who become employees. Public school systems in the country on average are not doing great. And I think that the misnomer in Michigan is that the Detroit public school systems are doing so poorly compared to the rest of the state, when in fact, quality of education as measured by academic performance for Michigan public schools as a whole are not doing well and are down compared to historic times. You were an educator. You were an educator here. Mm-hmm. And now you are part of partnerships in this community, many of which you lead and you're known for really around the world in terms of how you pull together the philanthropic community, civic community, and the business community to solve problems in Detroit. Talk about first just the importance of all of those different communities working collaboratively towards our future. But then talk about what more can we do to help these kids? I mean, because it's one of those things where people would ask me, and typically have an opinion about most everything, and I don't, because it seems like such a large problem rooted in a lot of systemic inequities and just circumstance that are to no fault of the kids that it's now affecting. So the importance of organizations working together, and then what more can we do for our kids?
Sure. So, I think about my time as an educator before I came here and the second time. So, yes, I was a teacher in Detroit Public Schools, and why I actually left initially to go get my doctorate in urban superintendency was seeing that this district was losing thousands of students a year. I think about the school that I taught in Greenfield Park. It has since been demolished, and the devastating effect that that has on neighborhoods and communities. And so when I was superintendent in Milwaukee Public Schools, the United Way was actually one of our most significant partners. And I firmly believe in collective impact, the power of bringing together resources, people, their energy, their talent, their expertise to be able to solve some of these toughest problems. And as an educator, I became frustrated with all of the different initiatives that we had in place and still not seeing the type of results that we want for our children. So first, I definitely believe that districts cannot do this on their own. And full disclosure, Dr. Vitti and I went through the same program at Harvard. So, I firmly believe that we have to do our best to put our support around our leaders, and it's more than money. It is more than even time. I mean, it really does take this intention, the collective will, and building trust with our communities, with our children, and the institutions to be able to make the change that we want to see. We talk a lot about the unprecedented times that we find ourselves in. I don't know that we're talking enough about some of the positives, at least from the nonprofit perspective, and even in the educational space, with collective will. Collective struggle in some instances with advocacy and being willing to pivot. I strongly support community schools. We're actually launching some in Pontiac and Southfield, River Rouge, and Hazel Park. We're providing wraparound services for homeless youth that are currently in our city, in the city of Detroit. And the same energy that we had where everyone was available by phone, everyone was accessible, everyone was willing to lean in, we have to have that same type of attitude when it comes to our children. A lot of times we try to fix them, and we have to ask. We have to ask them what they want. We have to ask them.
It goes back to what you were saying.
You have to ask them what they need. If I could share a quick example, this was back in 2016 where we had an unarmed black man that was killed by the police. This was in Milwaukee, in a neighborhood called Sherman Park. And everyone, both the police officer and the victim were former students in Milwaukee Public Schools. So everyone was just talking about our students and they weren't going to accomplish this and look at what they do. The city was on fire. And before I did anything, I called my student advisory group together. And I said, this is what people are saying, but I want to know how you feel. How are you experiencing that? What's your lived experience here as a citizen in Milwaukee? And just hearing their stories it's what really propelled us to start an entire equity agenda for the students. And that's the same approach we have to take now. United Way has done a total pivot in terms of how we talk about equity, in terms of how we wrap our arms around our children and wrap our arms around institutions. So I think, that was a very long-winded way of just saying that, it's going to take all of us. It's all of our responsibilities to make sure that our children are successful. We can't stand back in judgment. Everyone has a platform. Everyone has an institution that can lean in and provide resources for our students. So I'm hopeful with some of the programs that we have in place, but I know it's not enough. And we have to start with talking with our children, talking with the families, and figure out how we can accelerate achievement for them.
Thank you. Kofi, I talked about how all of your past successes and candidly, you likely don't have to be working, didn't have to come to Detroit. So I'd really like to understand what those conversations were like with you, much like I was interested in Sean's in terms of, why here, why now? And the caveat I'll put to it is that I'll speak for me, not for the Chronicle. It's so important to have a brother at the helm of if not one of the top 2 or 3 most significant businesses in this town, because over the past several years, a lot of the esteemed black executives who are the black leadership in Detroit, have retired from their positions. And unfortunately, in many instances, those positions were not backfilled by people of color. So when you look at who is corporate leadership in Detroit, decision makers, owners of P&Ls in organizations, they're very few. And so it's meaningful for black folk to see you in this position. And then secondarily, just what Bedrock continues to do, you continue to make investment. And so to me, that's a big deal, because when Dan had his health challenge, I think a lot of people were wondering, would there be a significant pullback? And you're still opening cranes now to stories of you guys making significant acquisitions. You're spending money on placemaking. And so why did you come here and take this position? And talk about what it means to you to be a person of color, a brother in this role.
Sure. Thank you for that, Dennis. I think about a year ago, as you pointed out, I had just retired from my position as Chief Operating Officer of 5 Points, a publicly traded company and the largest master plan community developer in California. But I'd been either in the public realm or in the private realm building real estate in some fashion and doing business attraction, business development. And, I felt, okay, I'd done what I could, and it was time for me to step back. But think of the times we were in. A week after I retired, COVID hit. Within that month, George Floyd and everything else, and all hell broke loose. So here I am sitting on my deck in Walnut Creek, California, basking in the sunshine and really wondering what the heck is going on. And perhaps the most telling part of it was I'd considered myself a decent urban developer for the last 35 years of my professional life. And that means that I have impacted, hopefully, communities, places, and spaces, as we talked about, hopefully positively. And yet, as you, Dennis, and others may not know, I'm originally from Ghana. And the very fact that I could come from Ghana, have 2 suitcases, go to Berkeley, and then have the opportunity and frankly the successes, the experiences I've had in America, just shows the promise of this great country, right? And yet I'm sitting back on my deck and looking at these scenes and wondering what the heck is going on, and more importantly, in moments of sort of self-reflection, I think, what could I have done differently? What could I have done differently as an urban developer in all this time? I mean, I was building these beautiful parks, I was, making sure that there were significant community benefit packages. I was trying to bring in the local workforce. I was doing all those things. And it hit me, and this is even before I got the call, it hit me that I may have missed, and I think you pointed out earlier, I think you did, Sean, you got to go to the root cause of it. And you mentioned it's the systemic racism. Those inequities that we're seeing exploding on the scene, which have been emphasized in many respects through the pandemic and how it's hitting our communities in a disparate portion, all because of the social inequities created by the systemic racism. And I said to myself, wow, perhaps if I had spent more time thinking about growing wealth and improving health outcomes in the same community that I'd been working in, just perhaps there may be more generational, as you said, economic mobility. And fundamentally, what does that mean? It means people would have choices around what they do, they have a sense of self-determination. Anyway, so that was all running around my head. And, when you're sort of sitting on the deck and all that, what do you think you do? You say, well, maybe I'll start to influence policy. So I started to write papers. And just about, and my wife and I had all these great plans. We were going to weddings. We had a wedding in Barcelona, cruises into up in Europe. It was great. Couldn't go anywhere. So literally, and here's a guy who's been working, 15 hours a day for most of his life. So anyway, so then the phone rang. Headhunter. Wasn't interested. But the beautiful thing was there's a certain persistence in that process. And I started reading a little bit more about Detroit. And the only experience I'd had with Detroit was when we were in Cleveland, one of my daughters is a pretty good lacrosse player. So I'd have to drive all the way from Cleveland up to Grosse Pointe for her to battle the I don't know, I can't remember the girls' school out there, but it was a pretty prominent school. Anyway, but I didn't know that much about it. And of course, I'd been to Ford Field when I was with the Browns. But in this process of sort of due diligence on my part on Detroit, I had the pleasure of coming to Detroit. And I stayed at the Shinola, and I walked around the Hudsons and walked around downtown. And of course, this is during pandemic time, so I still have not seen the Detroit that you guys know and love, right? It's beginning to creep in every Friday night, perhaps, but I haven't yet seen it. And in fact, when I first came here, the perception from my perception was so wrong that the reality was like, wait a minute, you guys, I said literally to the senior leadership, you really don't need me. You guys are doing great. I'm happy to be an advisor. This is great. But then I had sort of that, I'm sure the experience that Jake has had a few times, and just sitting with Dan and Jen Gilbert and listening to them and hearing what they have in mind for Detroit. And when I tell you that what they were saying was so in sync with how I had been feeling about how city building should occur, as I call it, the comprehensive economic uplift of the city, across the whole city. That's where their focus is. And Dan just says, Detroit needs to find its rightful place back as a world-class city in the 21st century. Boom. That's all he has to say. And I'm like, oh, that means so much, and it means everything. And I said, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that. And that's why I said, okay, I'm going to get back in the ring, as I put it. And so here I am, and I'm happy to be here, And I'll tell you that, as you've pointed out, all these sort of connections are so important for that economic uplift, that comprehensive uplift of the community. I mean, I've studied a little bit around the world with respect to what it takes. And look, you need creativity, and obviously we're finding that. I mean, that's how the StockX's of the world are coming forward. I mean, the work you're doing with the students and the young kids and creating these new entrepreneurs, you're giving pathways for their creativity. You need connections, because you got to connect the dots. You got to be able to figure out how folks can actually influence the pipeline of their careers. And you need capital. And obviously Jake knows all about how that plays such a significant role. You need creativity, connectivity, and capital. Then you really have to have a strategy around where the opportunities might be. And it's not necessarily chasing the opportunities, because I think often in business development and economic development, we spend a lot of time chasing deals, and we spend a great deal of time with site selectors who have already sort of got 15 options and we're one, and you're chasing them. And it's a dance, believe me. You got to play it, but you got to dance to that tune to some extent. But I think the critical thing is to really say to ourselves, what are the unique opportunities available to us that we can grow? And we still have, the home of the automobile, and the automobile industry has clearly made it clear. They are moving to the electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, etc. We need to be there. We need to create those places and spaces where those industries can grow here. And those industries have become much more complicated than the old combustion engines. Right now, as we talk about EVs, we're talking about batteries, we're talking about chips, we're talking about robotics, we're talking about Internet of Things, we're talking about all these things that need to grow as part of the new growing economy of Detroit. So I spend quite a bit of time these days thinking about where we can place our resources and how we can use those resources to create opportunities for others who need to add frankly, their capital and their experience to grow that industry. And that's, I think, how we're going to make a difference. So as Jake pointed out, the first 10 years, and this is Bedrock's 10th year, just so pointed out. And I'm sure, to your point, I'm sure Dan probably knew he was going to be here at this time, right? But it's an amazing job to have taken Detroit from where it was 10 years ago to where it is today. The next 10 years, it's all about how Detroit's going to really take its rightful place in that 21st century as the leader in the whole sort of automobile, electric vehicle manufacturing and everything associated with that. And I think that Bedrock has a place in that. It's about making sure the places are attractive to the folks who want to bring their companies here. Jake said, at the end of the day, it's a very human decision. The CEOs come in, they drive around, they say, okay, I like this office building. Well, where are my folks going to live? Mm-hmm. Where are their kids going to go to school? Where are they going to eat? And that's part of where Bedrock has a significant role to ensure there's a diversity of options for those employees.
So you mentioned a couple words that I just jotted down, Kofi. Diversity, systemic racism, growing wealth, and the need for capital. Jake, I mean, you know, it's well documented that, you know, black folks' access to capital is not at par with white peers. If you walk into a bank to go get a loan and I walk into the bank to get a loan, you're gonna get closed on at a higher percentage of me just because you're a white male, and I'm gonna have less of an opportunity to get that financing just because I'm a black male. And it may also you have better sneakers on today too. That may
I'm
lend
trying to keep
itself
up
to
with
it.
you. That's important.
But you know, what sense of responsibility you are building DVP, StockX, and dozens, hundreds of other investments in a city that's 85% black, with kids who are all growing up on their phones and Xboxes and PlayStations playing video games that have no idea that they could actually learn to code and make those video games and become an entrepreneur and become a producer, not a consumer. What responsibility do you feel as the leader of DVP to energize that pipeline of opportunity so that in this city that's 85% black folks in particular can have an opportunity to present, to pitch? And I know some of the things you guys have done with your big pitch days and other entrepreneurial things that you've done to help encourage that, but talk about the importance of that.
Sure. No, I think, you know, to be totally honest, that responsibility has become so much more clear to me in the last 5 years than in the first 5 years. You know, when I started at Detroit Venture Partners, I was just trying to find one company to help make it successful in the city of Detroit. You know, there was not a real tech startup tech community, and I knew how tough it was in every city to build successful companies. And so I was so heads down focused on just how do we get companies off the ground? How do we make our first few investments? How do we have a space where startups can work? And then over the last 5 years, you know, that responsibility has become, you know, just so much more clear to me. And thinking of yourself as a leader too, you know, it's an interesting thing. You know, we don't always notice ourselves as potential leaders. And so, you know, I think one of the first things we had to realize and pick our heads up and look around was our investment team has to be diverse. Our investment team has to be representative of the community. And so, you know, if you look at our team today versus our team 10 years ago, you'll notice a big difference, just in terms of, our team is, has Black investors, has Hispanic women, men. I think we were pretty much all white men when we got started. And so I think that's important. Number one is if you're going to be investing, you have to make sure your team, whatever biases you have can be mitigated by the fact that even unconscious biases can be mitigated by the fact that if you bring in a diverse team and you bring in a lot of perspectives. And so I think that's important. And not only do we have a diverse team today, but we also have a great program, which is, just a little plug, a summer associate program at DVP, which I think is probably it's definitely one of the most diverse programs in venture capital in the country, and I think also one of the best programs in terms of access to real experience. So you work at DVP for a day, and you work in one of our startups for 4 days throughout the summer, and we're attracting talent from across the country there, which is going to be a great pipeline for our companies and for our funds. So there's certainly a responsibility there, and I think part of it starts with the team, and then you have to really be I guess, deliberate and focused on it. You can't just, say we're going to, let things happen. We have to kind of take a role in that. And so one of the strategies we have is really finding founders at really early stages to back, because you're kind of building a pipeline of opportunities. You don't know which one is going to take off and attract the next 10 or $20 million in capital, and you can't force that necessarily. It's so hard to build companies, but you can make sure that you're planting seeds across a wide range of founders and making sure that they're well represented. And so Detroit Demo Day is one. You mentioned this. We have now for the last 4 years backed 50 founders through Detroit Demo Day. And that's an opportunity for someone to get on stage, pitch their business, get access to a broad range of customers, but also really founder-friendly capital. And that pool of founders can become our, the seed stage startups that we can then invest in. And we're actually about to, we haven't announced it. I guess I can't break it right here. I know we love breaking news on these shows, but we have a couple startups that we've invested in an early stage that we're now going to be backing at a later stage with a lot more capital. So the point, it is. I feel a big responsibility now that I could call myself a leader, although you don't always think of yourself that way. Now that we've had some level of success and we feel like there's real momentum here, then you really start to realize, okay, we have a real responsibility. It's not just a nice to have; it's a need to have. I would say seeing Dan Gilbert's his real care, and Jennifer, their real care and attention around how do we build an inclusive community. It's inspiring. It comes from the right place. It's and so I'm sure it'll come up in our conversation. I'm meeting with Dan in the office later today, which is probably the first time we've done that in a long time. And we'll probably talk about this, what we talked about today, and how do we do more, and how does he, put more capital behind it, and how do we attract others, and so it can't be one company and one investor that takes on that mantle. But yeah, it's our primary. It's one of our primary goals and challenges over the next 10 years. I mean, it's so important to set that. And how do we? And honestly, it's how we're going to be successful as a city. If we can show that we are the most, not the best tech hub in the Midwest, but the most inclusive. What a competitive advantage is that? Right. For as we're trying to attract talent from across the country, and as we're trying to inspire people who are who are young in the city today, and what's possible, and why they should stay here and build their companies here.
And Dennis, just 30 seconds. I think part of that has to be building a pipeline from the neighborhoods to downtown Midtown. So that's one of the reasons last year Boys and Girls Club merged with Pony Ride, which was a small business co-working space and maker space in Phil Cooley. That's right. So we actually merged. So now Pony Ride is only located inside of Boys and Girls Clubs. And we have one location, but we'll be expanding to a total of 5 locations this year. And the power of that is that we understand we have to go to where the talent is, right? We can't always request that the talent comes to us. And so we're able to really give a place for neighborhood entrepreneurs to build their business, right? We're also showing the kids real-time entrepreneurs who look like them, but we're also creating space for a unique type of entrepreneur, or often overlooked type of entrepreneur. There's very few places you can take your kids, right, to your maker space or your co-working space. So we're filling that need. And then also we're finding that there's a unique type of entrepreneurs who are often overlooked. As an example, we've been building the sports coalition. We have 6 leagues who are in our spaces, right? Handball, soccer, volleyball, football, basketball. But we're giving them professional space to actually grow their clubs, which is often overlooked. And the power of that when you talk about revitalizing a city, and Kofi kind of hit on it earlier, is people want a place where they can, of course, educate their kids, but also they need rec, they need sports, they need out of school time programming, quality. And if they don't have that, they'll leave the city and go into the suburbs in order to get that. So I think what Boys and Girls Club is doing, and we did build an ecosystem when I came on. We drew a 5-mile radius around each of our clubs, and we said we have 400,000 youth within a 5-mile radius of our clubs. How do we best serve them? And it's by building this ecosystem where we're supporting entrepreneurs in that ecosystem. We're hiring them to help run our programs as program partners, and then our vendors are within the ecosystem. And because of that, we invest about $1 million a year back into the ecosystem, 1.8 over the last 2 years. And as we look to scale over the next 5 years, we anticipate investing $40 million back into the ecosystem.
So that wasn't 30 seconds. They're showing me white signs.
What was that, 90 seconds?
But that's all right. But, I'm always joined now in studio by my dear friend, Andre Ash. Andre, sorry for the delay, but I pass the mic to you. Good morning.
Good morning, Dennis. That's okay. But briefly from our next guest ahead, I want to ask this question both to Dr. Hudson and Sean Wilson, and briefly with 60-second responses from the both of you. To that point, how significant is the continuation of community, corporate, foundation, and government partnerships for Detroit? What does that look like now and moving forward? We'll start with Dr. Hudson. 60 seconds.
It's mission critical. And so during at the height of the pandemic, we raised $37 million, and we had over 70 organizations that partnered with us to be able to administer over 1,000 grants to the nonprofit sector, to our schools, also working with a number of social service agencies. And so that type of collaboration is essential that we continue it. With the gift that we received from Mackenzie Scott, we're actually launching our Racial Equity Fund. So continue to look for that. And our plan is to not only invest in nonprofit organizations and social service agencies, but also our churches. We also want to invest in individuals who have innovative ideas and ways they can serve the community. But it takes all of these different organizations coordinating together to be able to make that type of a difference. So we can't lose the momentum that we gained during the pandemic, and as tough as it's been on as many people that have been hurt by this, we have to continue to use some of those strategies that actually helped us assist so many people during this time. So to answer your question, I hope that was 60 seconds. We can't lose the momentum, and this collective impact approach with our corporate and our philanthropic partners is essential for the success of our community.
Yeah, I would definitely piggyback on that. I mean, I think it is mission critical, as Darian said, and briefly, this is a live example of why it's so critical. United Way was an early adopter as we sought to reimagine the Boys and Girls Club. Before we had it fully blown out, they said, we see where you're going, we're going to invest in that. You need that in order to build momentum and scale. And then Bedrock, just last year, we partnered with Bedrock to launch the first ever fashion and design industry club, where we immerse youth into the fashion business, right? So we paid them $10 an hour over 14 weeks to learn the fashion industry, everything from cutting and sewing. We challenged them to launch a social justice line, t-shirt and hoodie line, and we actually licensed their designs for as much as $1,500. And then we took it to market inside of Detroit is the New Black and sold over $10,000 during Black History Month. So when you think about that, career startup ready, but we couldn't have done that without Bedrock. And now we're looking to scale those types of industry clubs to 14 by the year 2025.
Now, this question for Kofi and Jacob, and you touched on it a little bit. I want to follow up because equity and inclusion are buzzwords that have become more broadly embraced in companies today, from development, jobs, residential placement, the worries of gentrification. How do you ensure that on every level, legacy Detroiters, whether it's the residents or investing into entrepreneurs, how do you ensure that legacy Detroiters feel included and not left behind in the city's forward trajectory? 60 seconds from the both of you. Let's start with Kofi.
Sure, thank you. I think, well, first and foremost, I think Sean mentioned it earlier that you have to, at the end of the day, you have to reach out to the community. You have to reach out to the community. Look, we have great ideas. We have a great platform. We have resources. But it's all our city, and we need to make sure that we are inclusive in the manner that we ask the question of the people in the community that may ultimately be affected. That's one. But secondly, we also recognize that given our platform and our resources, we may be able to create perhaps some kind of a pipeline for others to come and co-invest with us and next to us. We may be able to, build on 3 acres, but leave an acre or so for others who are in the community to come and co-invest with us, because perhaps we've created a safer investment opportunity for them as they co-invest or co-develop adjacent to where we're building. And we also can use our resources to perhaps do some of the front work, if you will, all the research, et cetera, and identify opportunities, and then make sure that information goes to those who have the abilities and maybe support them with resources so they too can go forward and build. Ultimately, while as we say, we have great resources, and Jake mentioned this, we absolutely have to create opportunities for others to co-invest and co-develop in and around us for this ultimately to benefit everybody. And every decision has to think of the fact that this city is a very diverse city, and as such, there has to be a diversity of opinion.
Well, just to add to that, I think for us in the tech and startup perspective, we need a diverse team investing. We need real opportunities for people of color to learn venture capital and startups in tech. That's both at Detroit Venture Partners and early in the pipeline, like Apple. The Apple developer campus that's coming to Detroit, which will be really exciting to kind of develop engineering talent. And then at the end of the day, it's going to be on us to make sure that the people who are receiving capital, the startups that we're backing, that are really well representing the community, that we have Black founders and women and men receiving capital. And so that's, there's no way around that being the ultimate end goal of everything we're doing, which is to build companies that are, both run by and hiring and employing people of color throughout the city of Detroit. So that's how we're going to measure ourselves over time.
To all of you, actually, and you continue to follow all of our stories and news anytime, and for a full broadcast of this production at MichiganChronicle.com. Dennis, back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Hey, look, in closing, I think a couple things are clear. Detroit has not moved forward over the past several years without partnership from the philanthropic and business and entrepreneurial communities supporting political leadership with their mission. Two, the other thing that is clear to me is that which we heretofore would have thought was impossible is possible. No one would have thought that an individual would have acquired 100 plus properties downtown, instilled investor confidence in the broader community that would then spill out to investment in the neighborhood. It's possible. No one would have thought that a startup would have launched in Detroit and in just 6 years be valued at close to $4 billion and be widely accepted and used across the globe. It's obviously possible. However, in a city that is predominantly Black, I think we all agree and are all committed to ensuring that people that have always stayed in Detroit, have remained in Detroit either because they couldn't move or because they chose to stay and support, have an opportunity to participate. You are all doing your part to make sure that happens. On behalf of Real Times Media, the Michigan Chronicle, Hiram Jackson, we appreciate your work. We hope to have you back to talk about what you have done. Maybe in a year or so from now, we can reconvene this panel. For those of you who watched this morning and got up early with your coffee to share this discussion with us, thank you and enjoy the balance of your day.